Welcome to Shadows at Dusk. Dusk is not the end. It's the doorway between two worlds. A place where stories slip through, quiet, cold, and true. You've entered that space now, and what follows is meant for you. Stay in the shadow. The forest's hush shattered, ripped apart by the percussive violence of a rifle, and I became stone mid-stride. This pilgrimage was meant for solace, a shedding of urban skin, an immersion in the untamed green. Instead, fate had cast me as an unwilling spectator to forbidden acts. And now, the rustling leaves beneath my frantic feet sang the rhythm of survival. The wilderness wasn't just a place for me. It was a language I understood, learned in childhood rambles through the folds of the ancient Appalachians that cradled my hometown. More hours were logged under canopy than roof. So when the city's ceaseless clamor became a weight, a pressure behind the eyes, the remedy was instinctual: retreat. A week carved from the calendar, a drive toward the familiar embrace of the national forest. The design was elegantly simple: 5 days of solitary wandering, bivouacking beneath star-strewn velvet, purging the mind of deadlines and the hollow chatter of office corridors. Such pristine plans, I should have recalled, rarely survive contact with reality. The initial 48 hours unfolded like a dream woven from crisp air and sunlight. Autumn had set the woods ablaze, a breathtaking riot of crimson and sovereign gold. My boots carried me deep into the backcountry's heart, leagues away from the well-trodden arteries of tourism and the communal hum of designated campsites. Here, solitude reigned, a trinity of self, arboreal giants, and the fleeting curiosity of white-tailed deer. Day 3 beckoned towards uncharted territory. A faint trace, less path than memory etched by game, snaked into denser woods. Confidence, buoyed by reliable navigation skills and the satellite glow of my phone's GPS, overruled caution. Besides, the siren call of discovery, of seeing the unseen, was the very essence of this escape. Late afternoon light slanted through the trees when the first shot punched the stillness. Confusion prickled. Hunting was prohibited here, unequivocally out of season. A ranger managing wildlife? Perhaps. But then, carried on the capricious breeze, came voices, rough-hewn, laced with an anger that raised the fine hairs on my neck. This held no official cadence. A deep wrongness resonated in the air. Prudence warred with an insistent curiosity. The sensible path lay behind me, back towards the known. Sensibility, however, has seldom been my defining trait. Moving with the practiced quiet of a predator, I ghosted towards the sound. The dense woods gradually yielded, revealing a small, secluded clearing. From the concealing girth of a venerable oak, I peered into a scene that turned my blood to ice water. 3 figures occupied the space, rifles held with casual menace. Yet it wasn't merely the firearms that sent a chill through me. It was the still forms at their feet. 2 deer, stark evidence of illicit harvest, and beside them, something far larger, shrouded beneath a stained canvas tarp. "Get it loaded fast," one man snarled, his voice grating. Don't need no rangers sniffing round. As they wrestled with the covering, it slid sideways, exposing the hidden truth. A hand flew to my mouth, stifling the gasp that threatened to betray me. Not another deer, a bear, a colossal grizzly, its magnificent coat horribly matted with crimson. Poachers, brazen, illegal, desecrating this sanctuary. My thoughts spun. Evidence, report, action. Slowly, painstakingly, I reached for my phone. A single photograph. The brittle snap of a twig underfoot detonated in the charged silence. 3 heads jerked upright, eyes scanning the tree line. Hear that? One rasped, hefting his weapon. There was no time for assessment, no pause for confirmation. I spun, abandoning all stealth, exploding back into the undergrowth. Shouts erupted behind me, quickly followed by the unmistakable, terrifying cadence of pursuit. There, get him, a raw voice bellowed. Don't let him slip. Fear lent impossible speed to my limbs. I plunged through the forest, a frantic weave beneath low-hanging boughs, a desperate hurdle over skeletal logs. Yet I could hear them, crashing through the woods with unnerving familiarity, closing the distance. Their motivation transcended mere capture. It was lethal. A rifle cracked again. Air screamed past my ear, followed by the sharp thwack of lead biting into oak bark mere inches away. They weren't chasing, they were hunting, witness elimination. I wrenched myself left, a desperate, instinctive zigzag, hoping to spoil their aim. My lungs burned fiercely, legs turning to sodden weights, but slowing down was unthinkable. The campsite, the satellite phone, the lifeline became a desperate beacon. But panic had shredded my internal compass. The familiar woods dissolved into an alien labyrinth. I ran blind, propelled solely by the primal imperative to escape. Another report, closer still. A sudden, searing kiss of heat along my arm. Glancing down, I saw the fabric of my jacket torn, blood welling bright against the dark material from a shallow graze. The stark reality struck with visceral force. Capture meant death. Bursting through a final curtain of foliage, I found myself teetering on the lip of a steep ravine. Far below, the roar of a river echoed upwards. Indecision paralyzed me for a heartbeat. The sounds of pursuit intensified, drawing nearer. A choice made in the crucible of adrenaline. Down. I scrambled, half sliding, half climbing down the treacherous slope, loose stones skittering away beneath my scrabbling boots. More than once, gravity nearly claimed me, my grip finding purchase only on exposed roots or slender saplings. Above, at the ravine's edge, the poachers' voices carried clearly. They'd lost visual contact in the dense tangle. Must have gone down, one concluded. You two circle round, head him off at the bottom. I'll track him from here. Despair tightened its grip. A trap. My gaze fell to the river below, a churning ribbon of white fury twisting around jagged rocks. The drop was significant, the current visibly malevolent. But what alternative remained? Drawing a ragged breath, I launched myself from the slope. Stones cascaded around me, broadcasting my desperate flight. A shout from above, Another gunshot slicing the air, but my trajectory was too erratic, too swift for any true aim. I impacted the water feet first. The glacial shock hammered the air from my lungs. Instantly, the current seized me, dragging me under into a maelstrom of cold and chaos. Disorientation reigned for a terrifying moment before raw survival instinct clawed its way through. I fought towards the surface, breaking through with a desperate gasp. The river became my unlikely chariot, sweeping me downstream, away from the fading shouts of my pursuers. Safety, however, remained elusive. The watercourse was a treacherous gauntlet of submerged boulders and swirling eddies. Again and again, I was pulled under, each resurfacing a more desperate battle against exhaustion. Eventually, the river broadened, its frantic pace easing. Summoning the dregs of my strength, I angled towards the bank, hauling my sodden, trembling body onto a shore of smooth, cold stones. I lay there, coughing convulsively, shivering uncontrollably, time dissolving into a blur of misery. As the adrenaline tide receded, the starkness of my predicament asserted itself. Soaked, bordering on hypothermia as night descended, utterly lost. And somewhere in the darkening wilderness, 3 armed men harbored lethal intent towards me. My phone, my digital lifeline, was lost to the river's depths. I possessed only the drenched clothes clinging to my skin and the meager contents of my pockets. Yet breath remained, and with breath came possibility. Forcing my protesting limbs into action, I surveyed the immediate vicinity. The river had carried me a considerable distance, but complacency was a luxury I couldn't afford. They might still be searching. Help was the ultimate goal, reporting the atrocity paramount. But first, the night. Hypothermia was the immediate, tangible threat. Moving with the urgency of dwindling daylight, I gathered wisps of dry tinder and fallen branches. A small miracle, waterproof matches, still functional in a pocket. Soon, a hesitant flame flickered to life, nestled in a natural depression, shielded from unwanted eyes. Huddled close, attempting to steam my clothes dry by the meager warmth, the day's horror replayed itself. The poacher's callousness, the violated majesty of the slain bear. How long had this desecration continued? How many lives stolen? A conviction hardened within me. They could not prevail. Somehow I would reach civilization, but survival came first. The night stretched long, punctuated by the cold and the amplified sounds of the forest. Every snapped twig became a footfall, every shifting shadow a potential menace. Dawn arrived not with trumpets, but with a pale gray light and a renewed surge of resolve. At first light, I began walking, tracing the river's downstream course. Civilization had to lie that way. My body screamed protest. Hunger gnawed, dampness clung stubbornly, but the image of those men, of their continued violation, fueled my steps. Late afternoon brought the most welcome sound imaginable. Voices, not the harsh barks of the poachers, but the easy, cheerful cadence of hikers. Relief washed over me, so potent it nearly buckled my knees. Their shock at my appearance, filthy, bruised, eyes wide with trauma, was palpable. They offered sustenance, water, and crucially, one possessed a satellite phone. Within hours, I sat in the sterile light of a ranger station, the story tumbling out. met with widening eyes and grim understanding. The ensuing days were a whirlwind. Official statements, meticulous Park Service investigations, the unwelcome glare of media curiosity. They located my ravaged campsite, and following my detailed description, the grim abattoir in the clearing. The poachers were apprehended a week later, caught attempting to fence the bear's remains on the black market. Conservation groups lauded me, painted me a hero. I felt no heroism, only the residue of profound fear and the grim satisfaction of having inadvertently stumbled into the right place at the worst possible time, then doing the only thing possible, running for my very existence. The encounter left an indelible mark. My love for the wild endures. The feeling of belonging beneath an infinite sky persists. Yet now, it's tempered by an acute awareness of humanity's darker currents, the avarice capable of extinguishing something as magnificent as that grizzly for mere profit. I return to those mountains, not to the precise coordinates of my terror. That ground remains haunted, but to reaffirm what is precious, to remember that sometimes principled action demands facing peril, and to honor the untamed places that remain, recognizing the urgent need for their defense. Because ultimately, that is the crux, not the fear, not the chase, nor the narrow escape. It's the necessity of championing something larger than oneself, even when trembling, even when terrified. For if we abdicate that responsibility, who is left to stand guard? A simple getaway wasn't supposed to curdle into fear, but the second night on that isolated ranch delivered exactly that. An encounter, inexplicable and unsettling, ambushed me on a quiet patch of earth. I courted no trouble, so sought only a breath of night air, yet the strange illumination I witnessed on that ink-black road clings to my thoughts, a persistent unease. My city job had worn me down. Escape felt less like a luxury, more a necessity. An invitation materialized, a stay at a ranch, owned by acquaintances, nestled far from urban sprawl. It lay tethered to the world by a long, hushed road, a passage I noted upon arrival for its constricting narrowness. Trees pressed close, skeletal fingers interlacing overhead, swallowing the asphalt beyond the point where civic lighting surrendered. At the property's threshold, my host Elias awaited beside his venerable pickup truck. I trailed his dust cloud in my own vehicle, the tires spitting gravel as I maneuvered onto a designated patch of bare dirt. The afternoon sun, hovering around 3, still offered enough light for the promised tour. The main house presented a modest, single-level profile, fronted by a covered porch that sighed under the weight of years. Elias introduced Clara, his wife, whose welcome urged me to shed formality and feel settled. Their living space was compact, a sofa facing a television screen, a kitchen equipped with functional simplicity, and sleeping quarters branching off a hallway. Mine was the spare room at the corridor's end, a bed, a small chest of drawers, a solitary wooden chair occupying a corner. A thin curtain veiled the window. Drawing it aside revealed the wood's ragged edge, perhaps 50 yards distant. I emptied my travel bag, pulled on a fresh shirt, and rejoined my hosts. Elias proposed a walkabout. We ambled across the grounds. To the left stood a small barn, weathered but upright, flanked by animal pens and a chicken coop radiating an air of steadfast utility despite their age. The land sloped gently behind the house, descending toward a slender creek murmuring over stones. Beyond it, more trees climbed the horizon, interspersed with fenced parcels Elias identified as belonging to a neighbor. The air was thick with the scent of manure, damp earth, and sun-baked grass, an olfactory signature of remoteness that, strangely, affirmed my distance from the city's sterile breath. That initial evening unfolded over a meal shared with Elias and Clara. Grilled meat, beans, hearty vegetables, satisfying after the drive. Conversation meandered through commonplace topics until they cautioned me about the profound darkness outside. Venture out after sundown, they advised, and carry a torch. Neighbors were scarce, the nearest hamlet a 20-minute drive away. Having no nocturnal excursions planned, I mentally filed the warning away. Night didn't just fall, it seeped into the landscape, thick and absolute. The symphony of crickets commenced, punctuated by the furtive rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. A breeze stirred, whispering through the trees with a soft, sibilant sigh. I lingered in the living room until 10 or so, absorbed in a book under the solitary glow of a reading lamp, long after Elias and Clara had retired. The house settled into a profound quietude, broken only by the lamp's low hum and my own measured breathing. Weariness finally claimed me. In my room, the silence felt almost solid. I lay listening to the pulse in my ears, a familiar companion in utter stillness before sleep eventually took hold. Morning brought a simple breakfast. Elias then suggested trying our luck at a fishing spot down by the creek. Armed with rods and bait, we descended to the water's edge under a strengthening sun that demanded the shade of my hat. Our efforts yielded little. A pair of diminutive fish promptly returned to their element. We trudged back to the house around noon, where Clara had prepared lunch: rice, vegetables, repurposed meat from the night before. Afterwards, Elias departed for town errands, leaving Clara to her kitchen tasks. I opted for a solitary exploration, tracing a dirt path past the barn, curious about its destination. It looped lazily through overgrown grasses before circling back near the coop, leading me past a couple of derelict sheds, their disuse palpable, one featuring a door hanging drunkenly from a single hinge. The afternoon drifted uneventfully. Sundown heralded Elias's return. Fatigue etched his face, but he proposed a drive into town for a restorative drink. We found ourselves in a small, dimly lit bar populated by a few local patrons. The atmosphere was unassuming, the chatter amicable. No one breathed a word of anything peculiar, nothing to foreshadow the night ahead. We returned to the ranch around 9. As we navigated that final unlit stretch of road, its profound blackness felt almost aggressive, pierced only by the headlight's urgent beam. Beyond that cone of light lay utter void. Parking near the house, I exchanged goodnights with Elias and Clara and retreated to my room. Sleep, however, proved elusive. Dropping onto the bed, I felt a strange restlessness hum beneath my skin, perhaps an artifact of urban conditioning, my mind racing in the vacuum left by the countryside's deep silence. Around 11, the need for air became insistent. Locating a small flashlight in a kitchen drawer, I I slipped outside, easing the door shut behind me. The porch light cast a feeble, apologetic glow. The night air carried the scent of damp grass and the day's residual warmth. I walked toward the front gate, passing stacked flower pots huddled against the house wall. 20 yards brought me to the gate itself, a simple iron barrier secured by a chain. Beyond it lay the dirt road, a pale ribbon swallowed by darkness. Clouds veiled the moon, rendering the night nearly absolute. Leaning against the cool metal, I surveyed the road. A soft scuttling in the bushes nearby, likely just a field mouse or some other small nocturnal creature. I inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and then I saw it. Distant, singular, like the eye of a motorcycle or scooter, a focused circular beam advancing down a straight, empty road. My ears strained, searching for the accompanying thrum of an engine, but there was nothing. No mechanical growl, no whine, no vibration carried on the air. Only the low thrum of insects and the breeze sighing through the leaves. My grip tightened on the gate. The light drew nearer, unhurried, maintaining a steady cruising pace. It lacked the telltale jounce or sway of a vehicle on uneven ground. I clicked off my flashlight, hoping for clarity. The beam remained constant, unnervingly smooth. No silhouette framed it, no rider, no machine. Then, abruptly, after gliding closer for several more seconds, the light extinguished. Not dimmed, not faded. It was simply gone. The road offered no turnoffs, no dips in terrain. It was present, then absent. I remained frozen, anticipating footsteps, the appearance of someone carrying a lamp. The road held its darkness. Silence pressed in. A cold prickle traced my skin. My heart hammered against my ribs. Explanations flickered, illusions, reflections, but none fit the stark reality. After another minute or two, suspended in watchful tension, I reignited my flashlight, sweeping its beam fruitlessly up and down the empty road, probing the impenetrable tree line. My return to the house felt leaden, each step shadowed by the urge to look back. Inside, the living room lay dormant. I secured the door, the click of the lock unnaturally loud. Standing in the darkness, flashlight extinguished, I strained to hear anything beyond the frantic pulse in my own ears. Nothing. Eventually, I crept back to my room, the bed offering little comfort. Sleep was a distant shore. Should I tell Elias now? No, morning would be better. An hour, maybe more, passed before exhaustion finally dragged me under. At breakfast the next morning, I recounted the experience. Elias regarded me with gravity, yet without surprise. He admitted they'd witnessed a similar phenomenon, a strange, floating light, on that same road on several occasions. Clara nodded mutely, confirming a sighting of her own a month prior, though from a greater distance. Elias confessed he'd once ventured out, shotgun in hand, suspecting nocturnal mischief makers, but found no trace of trespassers. The source remained a mystery. Whispers among neighbors spoke of a phantom lantern, moving as if carried, vanishing when approached. No one had an answer. A chill snaked down my spine. Had they ever heard footsteps, I asked, or glimpsed a figure associated with the glow? Elias shook his head. Only the light itself was ever seen. Clara confessed her unease, speculating about reflections or distant headlights refracted in some peculiar way, while simultaneously acknowledging the layout of the land rendered such explanations improbable. The isolation was too complete, the terrain too straightforward. That day, I moved through the motions of normalcy, assisting Elias with fence posts, hammering recalcitrant nails, distributing feed to the animals. But the image of the solitary light hovered at the edge of my thoughts. I declared my intention to watch for it again that night. Elias offered no objection, merely stating he wasn't certain he'd join me. The prospect, he admitted, unsettled him. Waiting in the dark for the inexplicable held little appeal. I understood. I promised to report any sighting. Dinner was early that evening. Elias retired around 9, Clara shortly after. I remained, pacing the confines of the living room, the slow tick of an old wall clock marking time. By 10, the waiting became unbearable. I needed to know. Grabbing the same flashlight and shrugging on a light jacket, I ventured back into the night. The air possessed a cooler bite than the previous evening. A subtle breeze raised gooseflesh on my arms. I returned to my post at the gate, hand resting on the cold iron bar, gaze fixed down the Stygian road. Darkness absolute. I killed the flashlight beam and waited. My vision gradually adapted. Stars emerged, scattered like diamond dust against black velvet, though the moon remained shy. The wind rustled the trees, carrying the scent of wet leaves and loamy soil. Each exhalation felt tight in my chest. "Stay calm," I silently commanded. Minutes stretched, then it reappeared, a nascent glimmer, far down the road, resolving slowly into focus. My eyes narrowed, searching for the familiar shape of a vehicle. It brightened, solidified, the same lone, circular luminescence, and the same profound silence. My mouth turned to dust. Sweat slicked my palms against the gate. It advanced with that unnerving, deliberate slowness. I stood rooted, my heart beat a frantic drum against my ribs, loud enough, it seemed, to echo off the metal barrier. Closer it came, yet revealing nothing beyond its own bright, featureless orb. Then, precisely as before, it blinked out of existence. The road plunged back into utter blackness. I stared at the void where it had been. No movement, no residual shape, no sound of retreating steps. A frustrated cry lodged in my throat. Instead, I thumbed my flashlight back to life, its beam stabbing into the darkness, illuminating perhaps 10 feet of dusty road before dissolving into the night. No tracks, no sign of passage. The rattle of the chain broke the silence as I unlatched the gate and stepped onto the road proper. Gravel crunched underfoot. I walked a few tentative yards in the direction the light had traveled, skin prickling with a potent mix of fear and adrenaline. My gaze swept the periphery, half expecting an ambush from the dense roadside brush. But there was only me, the narrow cone of light, and the oppressive night. No animals stirred, no voices whispered. After a minute that felt like an eternity, a visceral shiver coursed through me. This was far enough. Retreating quickly, I secured the gate and hurried back toward the perceived safety of the house. I roused Elias and Clara. My report brought visible anxiety to Elias's face. He spoke of accumulated local lore, enough strange accounts to lend credence to something genuinely uncanny. Clara, wrapped in a robe, simply stared at the floorboards, murmuring her incomprehension. We sat for a while in the living room's dim quiet, the ticking clock measuring out the mystery none of us could solve. Eventually, we dispersed back to our beds. The remainder of my stay was tainted. Relaxation proved impossible. Departure beckoned, yet a stubborn curiosity warred with my unease. I stayed 2 more nights. On the final evening, I stood vigil once more. The light manifested again, adhering to its inscrutable script. The silent approach, the steady beam, the sudden vanishing. No footsteps ever accompanied it, no voice, no human form revealed. After packing my bags and offering my farewells, Elias clasped my hand. "If you ever find out what that thing is," he said, his gaze serious, "you let us know." I gave my word, knowing I possessed not a single clue. On my way out, I exchanged a few words with a neighbor down the road. He acknowledged the light with a shrug, attributing it to some joker with a torch, though admitting no one had ever caught the prankster. It caused no harm, he added, just rattled folks unfamiliar with its appearances. Driving away from the ranch, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The dusty track looked utterly mundane under the morning sun, betraying none of its nocturnal secrets. Yet a knot remained tight in my stomach, a persistent residue of those nights. It persists still. I cannot unravel it. It wasn't merely a headlight. Its silence was too profound, its disappearance too clean. Logic insists on an ordinary explanation, some elaborate hoax, a person traversing that lonely stretch with a powerful lantern. But lacking proof, all I hold is the memory, that solitary beam gliding through the darkness, and the suffocating silence that invariably swallowed it whole. And that memory is more than enough to keep me perpetually on edge. That particular night, the night the shape materialized at the foot of my bed, conviction settled deep in my marrow. This was no phantasm spun from an aged mind. 83 years, etching their lines onto this mortal coil, had shown me marvels and peculiarities aplenty, yet none prepared me for the stark dread awaiting within the walls of Eventide Lodge. It was a night poised to unravel every thread of certainty I possessed about existence, its cessation, and the gossamer membrane stretched taut between them. My name is Silas Croft. For half a decade now, Eventide Lodge has been my address. As institutions of this nature go, it offers solace enough. The meals are palatable, the caregivers possess a gentle competence, and fragile camaraderie bloom amongst us residents. Still, an undeniable undertow of melancholy pervades such places. We are, all of us, adrift in the waiting room of eternity, bearing witness as companions and neighbors gently extinguish one by one. Morbid introspection, however, has never been my preferred companion. I seek distraction in the modest library's dog-eared volumes, coax life from the shared garden soil, and spin yarns of bygone days to any soul patient enough to lend an ear. But a shift had occurred recently, subtle disturbances at first, belongings migrating unseen, pockets of inexplicable cold blooming in my room's stagnant air, susurrations in the corridor when solitude was absolute. Initially, I blamed the relentless march of years. "Your memory's fraying, old fellow," I'd chide myself. Yet a primal instinct whispered otherwise. Something fundamental felt askew. The night in question found me surrendering early to my bed. My joints, those ancient hinges, sang a particularly fierce chorus of complaint, and I harbored hope that profound slumber might mute their aching song. Sleep must have claimed me swiftly, for the next awareness was a jarring prickle of unease. You comprehend the sensation, that uncanny certainty of being observed, the nerve end static crawling up the nape, the fine hairs lifting on one's forearms. That is what severed the cord of sleep. My eyelids flew open. For a stretched second, paralysis reigned. Breath hitched, limbs refused command. There, anchoring the dim space at my bed's terminus, stood a form. The room swam in shadows, illuminated solely by the faint, numerical glow of my bedside clock, yet the outline was stark, humanoid, utterly immobile, simply watching. My heart became a frantic drum against my ribs, threatening to splinter bone. A scream clawed at my throat, but found no purchase. I could only lie there, rigid with a terror colder than the grave, locked in silent communion with the motionless watcher. Time elongated, seconds distending into glacial epochs. Then, with excruciating slowness, the figure initiated movement. Not walking precisely, it was adrift, a fluid, soundless glide towards the flank of my bed. As proximity lessened, details sharpened. It possessed an unnatural height, eclipsing any man I'd ever encountered. Its substance seemed unstable, shimmering faintly, as though woven from moonlight and shadow. But it was the face, or the stark negation of one, that plunged me into true abyssal fear. Where features should have resided, there stretched only a smooth, undifferentiated blankness. I clamped my eyes shut, a desperate prayer forming that reopening them would reveal only empty air. But the sense of its nearness intensified, the ambient temperature plummeting with each infinitesimal shift closer. When the tension became unbearable, I forced my eyes open. The figure loomed directly above, its featureless expanse mere inches from my own face. Then, unspeakably, a void opened within that blankness, a dark, impossible aperture stretching wider than any human mouth could conceive. It spoke, the voice a sibilant whisper that seemed to emanate from the very air, from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Silas, it breathed, my name sounding distorted, ancient. The hour is upon you. In that instant, something within me fractured. The icy grip of paralysis shattered. Voice erupted from lungs I hadn't known still held such power. I screamed, a raw, primal sound thrashing violently against the confines of the bed. The figure recoiled, seemingly startled by the sudden ferocity. It withdrew, melting back into the room's deeper shadows with the same unnerving speed it had appeared. Light bloomed in the hallway. Hurried footsteps echoed. My door crashed inward, revealing two night nurses, their expressions masks of professional concern. "Mr. Croft, are you quite well?" one inquired, rushing to my side. Tremors racked my frame, cold perspiration drenching my night clothes. Someone was here, I gasped, gesturing towards the space the entity had occupied. A presence. It stood watching. It spoke my name. The nurses exchanged that glance, the one I recognized with weary familiarity, the poor soul, adrift in confusion look. One patted my hand with practiced gentleness. "It's all right, Mr. Croft. Just a bad dream, you see. There's nobody here now but us." But the chill in the air, the lingering echo of that whisper, the absolute certainty, this was no mere nightmare. The subsequent days unfolded in a muted haze. The staff observed me with increased vigilance, their hushed conversations punctuated by terms like sundowning and cognitive disturbance. Fellow residents offered a wider berth, perhaps fearing my perceived affliction was somehow communicable. Yet the conviction remained unshaken. I was not descending into madness. Something unearthly had occupied my room that night. I attempted research, fumbling with the community room computer, my arthritic fingers clumsy on the keys. The library's scant offerings on the esoteric proved utterly inadequate. I was adrift, isolated with my impossible knowledge. Nightfall became synonymous with dread. I'd lie rigid in the darkness, every settling creak of the old building, every fleeting shadow sending surges of adrenaline through my veins. Occasionally, a flicker at the edge of vision, something tall, shimmering, would vanish the instant I turned my head. A week after the initial visitation, I awoke not to darkness, but to an uncanny pearlescent luminescence filling my room. And there, stationed once more at the foot of the bed, was the figure. This time, however, it was not solitary. Orbiting it like ghostly satellites were other forms, vaguely human yet translucent, radiating the same soft, internal light. A jolt of recognition, sharp and painful, pierced through me. Former inhabitants of Eventide Lodge, faces I had known, individuals who had passed on. There was kind Mrs. Gable, who always slipped me an extra biscuit, Mr. Petrov, my formidable chess opponent, and, oh merciful heavens, was that Clara? My Clara, lost to me these past 2 years? The central figure lifted an arm, a slow gesture encompassing the spectral assembly. When it spoke, the voice retained its otherworldly whisper, yet somehow the terror felt diluted. "They await your company, Silas," it resonated. "It is time to step across." My gaze locked with Clara's phantom image, her familiar smile radiating the warmth of 60 shared years. A profound yearning surged, to reach for her hand, to shed this aching body and the suffocating loneliness. But another current ran deeper, stronger, defiance. "No," I managed, my voice trembling but firm. "Not yet. My chapter isn't finished." The figure inclined its featureless head, a gesture suggesting curiosity, perhaps even surprise. The surrounding spirits flickered, their expressions tinged with a gentle sorrow. Clara blew a silent kiss before she, and then the others, dissolved like morning mist. Only the figure lingered, observing me from its blank expanse. "You are unexpected, Silas," the whisper returned. "Few elect to linger when the threshold is offered." "Well," I retorted, a spark of my old contrariness igniting. "Always been a stubborn old goat. Ask anyone here." To my utter astonishment, a sound emanated from the figure, delicate and chilling, like wind chimes caught in a sudden squall. As you wish, it conceded, but understand this, the next invitation is not optional. And with that final pronouncement, it too vanished, plunging the room back into profound silence and darkness, leaving only the ragged rhythm of my own breathing. The following morning, I awoke infused with a startling clarity of purpose. My remaining time might be measured, but by heavens, I intended to fill it. I threw myself into volunteering, shared my stories with renewed vigor. I began composing my memoirs, determined to leave more than just fading memories behind. And each night, settling into bed, I issue a quiet challenge into the enveloping darkness. Not this night. I'm not prepared just yet. Sometimes, faintly, I fancy I hear the echo of those wind chimes, laughing softly in reply. I cannot know when the figure will return, tomorrow, next month, next year. Such knowledge is beyond me, but this I do know. Fear no longer holds dominion. When my true time arrives, I will face it. I will take that offered passage and join Clara and all those who have navigated the crossing before me. Until that moment, however, there is living yet to be done, and not even the emissary of death itself will hurry me along. A shriek tore through the sanatorium's dead wing, a sound sharp enough to splinter bone. Reflex snagged my breath, freezing me mid-step. My torchlight jittered, a nervous pulse painting arcs across the corridor's leprous skin. As a night nurse at Blackwood Sanatorium these past 3 years, the symphony of nocturnal unease was familiar, yet this cry resonated with a primal terror that bypassed familiarity entirely. Investigating it, I sensed dimly was to step across a threshold into a darkness far deeper than the unlit halls. I thought I'd grown accustomed to Blackwood's peculiar rhythms, the quiet hum punctuated by troubled sleep. The night shift was typically a landscape of hushed rounds, the clink of medication cups. But whispers had begun to circulate, ghost stories spun by weary staff about the old North Wing, phantom movements glimpsed peripherally, inexplicable electrical surges, noises that defied the building's groaning architecture. Administration waved them away, structural settling, frayed nerves. Standing there, however, heart hammering a frantic tattoo against my ribs, I knew this visceral dread was no mere invention. It came again, the scream, fainter now, attenuated by distance but undeniably human, undeniably wrong. It emanated from the North Wing, condemned and sealed months ago for renovations that never began. No soul belonged there. Protocol shrieked, security. Sanity whispered, retreat. Yet a deeper, more insidious current tugged me forward, a morbid magnetism pulling me toward the sealed threshold of the forsaken ward. Duty, perhaps, or some darker curiosity? Regardless, my feet carried me, souls whispering on the worn linoleum. The ward door groaned open on tortured hinges, exhaling a century's worth of dust and desolation. Stale air, thick as velvet rot, embraced me. My light carved unsteady paths through spectral landscapes of shrouded gurneys and walls weeping paper skin. Is someone here? My voice, thin and reedy, was swallowed by the oppressive emptiness. Hello? Only the vast, waiting silence answered. A hesitant step, then another. Floorboards moaned beneath my weight, each creak an accusation in this forgotten realm. Deeper within, the very atmosphere shifted, growing dense and cold, a palpable chill that had nothing to do with the draftless air. My torch flickered, the beam dimming precariously. A silent curse at my own negligence, batteries unchecked. I was poised to turn back, to flee this palpable wrongness, when I heard it. A thread of sound, a whimper thin and frayed, snagged the silence from a room further down. Pulse thundering, I approached the door hanging slightly ajar, a dark mouth in the hallway's face. I nudged it wider, the rusted metal screaming in protest. "Hello?" I whispered. "I'm a nurse. Let me help you." At first, the failing light revealed only deeper shadows. Then, a flicker of movement in the far corner. A shape huddled, a knot of tremors against the weeping plaster. Slowly, broadcasting calm I didn't feel, I advanced. "It's all right," I soothed. "You're safe. What's your name?" The figure stirred, lifting its head. I choked back a gasp. A man ravaged by neglect, hair a tangled thicket, beard wild and matted, his eyes luminous with a frantic, feverish energy, darted about before fixing on me. "Clara?" The name rasped from his throat, a relic unearthed. I froze. Not my name, but the desperate hope coloring the sound sent ice spiders down my spine. "No," I said softly. "My name is Ilara. I'm a nurse. Who are you? How did you get in here?" He shook his head, a violent, jerky motion. No. You are Clara. She said you'd come back, so she promised." I crept closer, mind scrambling. Delusional, clearly. But trapped? In this sealed wing? For how long? Who promised I'd come back? My voice was unnaturally steady. "The doctor," he breathed, eyes flicking to the shadowed corners as if expecting an imminent arrival. "She said, 'Wait here,' and Clara would return. You took so long. Why didn't you come back, Clara?" A cold dread coiled in my gut, a flicker of recognition buried beneath the grime and madness. The pieces clicked, forming a horrifying picture. A memory surfaced, murky and disquieting. The disappearance 6 months prior, coinciding with this wing's shuddering. A patient vanished, swallowed by rumor and fruitless police searches, presumed escaped, lost to the streets. But he hadn't escaped. He'd been entombed. "Silas?" I ventured, dredging the name from the old missing persons file. "Silas Vance?" His eyes widened, a spark of recognition flaring within their depths. "You remember?" A cracked, manic grin split his face. "I knew it. Knew you wouldn't leave me, Clara. Not forever." I drew a breath, forcing calm. "Silas, my name is Ilara. I'm not Clara, but I am here to help. We need to get you out of this place. You need care." The grin dissolved. "No," he whimpered, shrinking back. "Can't leave. She said stay. It's not safe out there." "Who said that, Silas?" I asked, the answer already solidifying like ice in my veins. "The doctor," he whispered again. "Dr. Thorne." My blood chilled. Dr. Eris Thorne. She'd presided over this wing before its closure, retiring abruptly just after Silas Vance vanished. "Silas," I began carefully, "Dr. Thorne isn't here. She retired months ago. Whatever she told you, it isn't safe for you here." Confusion warred with ingrained fear in his gaze. "But she comes, every night, brings food, tells me stories about the dangers." Bile rose in my throat. Had Thorne truly kept him here, a prisoner fed on fear and delusion? Why? How? I extended a hand. "Silas, come with me." please. I promise I'll keep you safe." He hesitated, then his cold, trembling fingers closed around mine. I helped him stand. He was skeletal, unsteady. We reached the threshold, freedom a breath away, when a voice, brittle as frosted glass, shattered the air. "And where do you think you're going?" I spun, heart seizing. Dr. Eris Thorne materialized from the gloom, a phantom in a stained coat. The professional composure I remembered was fractured, replaced by a feral energy glinting in her eyes. "Dr. Thorne, what is this? Why is Silas still here?" A laugh escaped her, high and thin, scraping against my nerves. "You couldn't possibly comprehend, Ilara. None of you ever did. Silas is sensitive. He sees the rot beneath the varnish of your world. He knows the truth." Silas trembled beside me, his grip tightening. Whether in fear or anticipation, I couldn't tell. "Whatever game you're playing, it ends now," I stated, forcing authority into my voice. "I'm taking Silas out. He needs medical attention." Thorne's expression hardened into something dangerous. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," she said, her hand dipping into her pocket, emerging with a sliver of surgical steel that drank the dim light. A scalpel. "Silas needs sanctuary," she continued, her tone shifting to a chillingly gentle, hypnotic cadence. "And now that you know, Ilara, so do you. Don't fret. You'll come to understand. You'll see the truth, just as he does." She advanced, the scalpel held ready. Instinct screamed. I hauled Silas back, slamming the heavy door against Thorne's lunge. Wood shuddered under her blows. "Help!" The cry ripped from my throat, raw and desperate, echoing down the vacant throat of the corridor. "In here! Security!" Thorne's fury vibrated through the oak. Then salvation, heavy footfalls drumming closer, shouts cutting through the nightmare. Hands wrenched the door, pulling us into a maelstrom of uniforms and flashing lights. Afterward, a blur, Thorne's chillingly calm surrender, Silas blinking owlishly under paramedic lights, the sterile drone of police inquiries. Watching Silas escorted away, his gaze met mine. A flicker of terror, yes, but beneath it, perhaps the first tentative dawn of awareness. The official reports will speak of delusion and abduction, of a disturbed mind holding another captive. But here, in the echoing quiet of Blackwood, where sanity frays like old thread, the questions linger, unsettling as the cold draft from the north wing. Who guards the guardians? And when the walls themselves seem to breathe madness, who can truly map the borders of the mind? That ancient phone booth, I never figured I'd hear it sing. A relic. Most everyone in this sleepy hollow swore it was dead wire, disconnected ages ago. No hum, no life, nothing. Yet one biting evening, walking the deserted street, it rang. Clear, sharp, insistent. The sound knifed through the quiet, cinching something tight in my chest. Utterly wrong. And right then, the ordinary veneer of this place began to peel away from me. My name's Elias, landed here half a year back, mostly to lend a hand at my Uncle Silas's garage. He's getting on, lost his taste for grease and complaining engines. So I face the customers, tinker with the easier fixes, try to impose some order on the chaos. It's no thrill ride, but the slow current suits me. One main drag, a solitary tavern, skeletons of buildings scattered about. Folks here tuck in early. Nights are for television static or, when sleep evades me, solitary walks under unreliable streetlights. The booth squats on a corner by the husk of a convenience store, shuttered long before my time. Plywood blindfolds its windows. Graffiti ghosts whisper faded words on the door. Rust bleeds down the booth's metal seams, its glass panes fractured like old ice. Inside, the receiver dangles from a coiled metal cord, paint flecking off nearby surfaces. Months ago, daylight curiosity made me lift it, stone dead, or so I'd believed. Then came that night, maybe a week past, returning from the tavern, nursing the memory of 2 beers, the air scraped cold against my skin. I usually cut through an alley, but some impulse steered me toward that corner. As I drew near, the ringing erupted, loud, jarring. I froze, eyes fixed on the booth. Inside, the phone pulsed with sound, definitely ringing. A quick scan revealed empty sidewalks, the darkened void of the abandoned store. Nothing else stirred. Hesitantly, I approached, heart thudding against my ribs, not fear of a phone exactly, but of the sheer wrongness. The booth door groaned open on protesting hinges. I reached in, lifted the receiver. The ringing instantly ceased. Silence, utter. Just the sound of my own breath echoing in the confined space. "Hello?" I ventured, then again, softer. No reply, not even a whisper of static. A vacuum. Gooseflesh prickled along my arms. I replaced the handset, the click loud in the stillness, and retreated. The following day, I tried to shelve it, mentioned it to Silas. He just shrugged. Crossed wires, maybe? Or the beer talking. He showed zero interest. A couple of neighbors offered only peculiar glances. One old-timer mumbled something about stories concerning that booth, then clammed up tight. Unease began to coil inside me, but dismissal felt impossible. I resolved to pass by again that night, just to see. 9 o'clock found me back on the street. The air stung, sharp enough to numb my nose. Streetlights sputtered, casting erratic pools of light. Reaching the corner, I waited. 5 minutes stretched into 10. Nothing. Feeling foolish, a sentinel guarding rust and cracked glass, I turned for home. Scarcely a few paces taken, and there it was, the ring, slicing the silence like a jagged alarm. I spun back, wrenched open the creaking door, snatched the receiver. This time, breathing. A slow, heavy cadence on the other end, deliberate, as if someone were consciously withholding words. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my throat. "Who's there?" Silence. Then the respiration resumed. My palms grew slick. My legs felt rooted to the spot. "Hello? Can you hear me?" The breathing hitched, quickened slightly, then abruptly cut off. Dead air. I stood frozen for several seconds, unsettled, almost trembling. Hanging up, I walked away quickly, eyes sweeping the shadows, searching for an observer I couldn't find. The sidewalk remained deserted. The defunct store loomed lifelessly. Over the next few days, I probed gently about the booth. Some folks waved me off. Others shifted nervously. An old regular at the tavern conceded there were whispers, strange calls from that corner, but offered no specifics. The town's tiny library yielded nothing. Archived local papers held no dramatic incidents tied to that location. Yet the rumors persisted, like damp rot, whispers of a phone ringing without connection, of those who answered hearing only bizarre noises or profound silence. A few claimed faint whispers, but tangible proof? None existed. I'm built practical, not prone to ghost stories, but the inexplicable gnawed at me. So I committed to checking every night for the remainder of that week, around the same hour. Some nights yielded only the forlorn silence of the abandoned booth. Then, on the fourth night, just as resignation began to set in, the summons came again. The sound made me jump. Inside, receiver clutched tight. Hello? A faint crackle, then the breathing returned, thin and erratic. I fought to remain calm, though my pulse raced. What do you want? The question felt absurd, flung into the void. The breathing deepened. Then, something akin to a single word brushed my ear, too faint, too distorted to grasp. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill. I can't hear you, I insisted louder. Speak up. The line clicked, instantly dead. Exhaling in a rush of frustration, I noticed my fingers trembled. My throat felt like sandpaper. Driven now, I circled the booth, examining its exterior. The phone line, the thick cable meant to connect it to the world, was severed, cut clean through, hanging uselessly at the back. No power, no connection. Impossible. The discovery sent a colder dread through me than the calls themselves. I stepped back, staring from the violated cable to the phone within. Logic offered no purchase here. My stomach twisted. My head felt light. Mentioning the severed cable to Silas the next morning earned me a weary sigh. Obsessed, he called me, warned me to let sleeping dogs lie, to stop stirring murky waters. He never elaborated on what he might have heard, but his face went unnaturally pale when I pressed, and he deflected every attempt to return to the subject. Around town, I caught more sideways glances. A couple of people asked, with strained humor that didn't quite land, if I had chatted with the mystery caller. The tension became a constant hum beneath my skin. Sleep fractured. I'd jerk awake, straining to hear a distant ring that wasn't there. On the sixth night, I tried anchoring myself in bed, but restlessness won. Coat pulled on, I headed out into the frigid dark toward the corner. Midnight. The streets were spectral voids. A sliver of moon offered little illumination. Reaching the booth, though I waited. My breath plumed in the icy air. Fingers numbing, I shoved them deep into my pockets. Just as I resolved to abandon the vigil, it rang. The sound pierced me. I flinched, then yanked the door open. Lifting the receiver, my voice cracked. Hello? The breathing again, rhythmic, measured. Then it paused. A faint rustling whispered across the line, like fabric brushing the mouthpiece. Who the hell are you? I demanded, striving for a steady tone. Nothing but the rustling and a low, crackling static. Another click. Silence. I slammed the receiver down, anger surging. A wave of frustration washed over me. I kicked the booth's metal side. Thwack. It shuddered, rattling the fractured glass. A dull ache shot through my foot. Then a soft thud from within the phone's casing, as if something small had been dislodged. I scanned the street again, empty, utterly deserted. The next day, I tracked down a local guy, semi-retired, who knew his way around old telecom gear. I explained the situation, the phantom ringing from the dead booth. He looked skeptical, but agreed to take a look after his workday. Around 7 that evening, we met at the corner. He came equipped with tools, a heavy flashlight. Opening the phone's housing revealed corroded terminals. He confirmed the exterior cable was cleanly cut. He attached a meter, probing for any stray current. 0 reading. "No juice," he declared, shaking his head. "No way this thing gets power." He lingered a few more minutes, perplexed, before packing up and leaving me alone with the silent enigma. Returning later that night, I half expected the tampering might have ended it. For a solid hour, I paced in the biting cold. A stray cat materialized, gave me a wary look, and vanished. Headlights from a passing truck swept the sidewalk. Otherwise, stillness. Relief began to bloom, a fragile hope that the calls were over. Then, just as I turned to leave, it rang. That same strident, echoing summons. My stomach plummeted. Inside the booth again, receiver pressed hard against my ear. This time, I said nothing, just listened. My heart hammered against my ribs. Silence at first, then a tentative inhale from the other side, almost nervous. "I know this phone is disconnected," I finally said, my voice low. "How are you calling me?" A beat of silence, then the breathing resumed, louder now. My hand, clutching the receiver, trembled. The phone's metal cord felt glacial against my wrist. My mind scrambled for explanations. A hidden transmitter, a prankster nearby. But the street remained stubbornly empty. The booths felt like a glass trap. "Why don't you talk?" My voice shook. Another pause, then a low, guttural noise, barely a grunt, slithered through the line. It sent an icy current down my spine. Sweat trickled down my temple. "Tell me what you want," I shouted into the mouthpiece. The click came immediately, followed by absolute silence. My breath hitched. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I stared at the inert handset, still dead. Stepping out, I scanned the desolate street. Flickering streetlights that cast long, wavering shadows. My legs felt unsteady, drained. I trudged home, the profound cold seeping into my marrow. For several days, I forced myself to ignore the booth, skirted the corner, took longer routes, buried myself in work at the garage. Sleep came easier, though the calls echoed in my thoughts. The severed cable, the silence, the rumors, it remained an unsolved equation. Part of me felt the pull, an insistent itch demanding to be scratched. Another part screamed to forget I'd ever lifted that receiver. Nearly a week passed. I was managing. Then, late on a Saturday, lying in the liminal space between waking and sleep, I heard it, or thought I did. That distinct ring, echoing not on the street, but inside my head. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding. Imagination, I told myself. But the doubt lingered, insistent. I dressed quickly, pulled on boots, and hurried out into the cold night air. Midnight again. Reaching the corner, the booth stood silhouetted under a sputtering streetlight. For a few heartbeats, Silence reigned. Then it rang, sharp, piercing, real. My hands shook. With immense effort, I forced myself inside one last time, picked up the receiver. The breathing was there, soft initially, then gaining weight. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment. Why do you keep calling here? The question hung in the air, tense. The breathing slowed, attentive. I can't keep coming here, I said, my voice strained, throat tight. What do you want from me? Silence, but for the respiration. Then, slowly, it began to fade, receding as if the caller was moving away from their end. My knuckles ached from gripping the cold plastic. I'm done, I whispered, the words tasting like finality. I'm done answering. I placed the receiver gently back onto its cradle, stepped out of the booth. My thoughts felt chaotic, yet my body felt a strange certainty. This chase led nowhere I could navigate. Whatever lurked on the other end of that impossible line, it wasn't mine to decipher or confront. I walked away, resolutely not looking back. The night air bit at my face, my breath clouding before me. Home beckoned. My heart still hammered, but a fragile sense of release settled over me. That broken phone, that phantom voice, they couldn't own my nights anymore. If it rang, let it ring into the void. I still don't have answers, never learned who or what occupied the other end of that line. The townsfolk sometimes cast those odd, assessing glances my way. Maybe they harbor secrets, maybe they're as lost as I am. But I've drawn my line. No more nightly vigils chasing whispers and breathing down a dead wire. If that ring cuts through the quiet again, I'll keep walking. Sanity demands it. If something beyond the veil is making calls on a dead line, it can leave its message for the empty booth. I'm not picking up again. Phantoms were fictions, flimsy tales spun for tourists, or so my pragmatic mind insisted. I scoffed privately at whispers of haunted hotels, of old manors groaning under the weight of unseen occupants. Such skepticism fractured the night I took the attic room in a guest house that had weathered more than a century. Agnes Blackwood, the proprietor, a woman of few words and fewer smiles, stood sentinel at the entrance, her posture as unyielding as aged oak. She permitted my entrance, suitcase bumping against the doorframe, before uttering a word. A small brass key, tethered to a label softened by time, was pressed into my palm. That particular room, she stated, her voice devoid of inflection, flat as slate. It tends to remain unoccupied. Guests find it unsettling. A shrug was my reply. I assured her my nerves were steady. A truth, perhaps, until that point. 3 flights I climbed, a groaning ascent upstairs that protested each footfall, the air thick with the scent of venerable timber and settled dust. The corridor above narrowed, its faded wallpaper curling away from the plaster like sunburnt skin. A solitary, naked bulb overhead shed a jaundiced, wavering light. My room lay sequestered at the corridor's terminus, adjacent to a grimy window overlooking the cobbled street. Pushing open the door revealed Spartan quarters, a lean bed, a modest chest of drawers, a lone chair angled near the window. A cramped closet huddled beneath the eaves, its ceiling slanted sharply. The air within felt dense, stagnant, creating an odd pressure in my ears, the kind you feel when a heavy door seals a small space. I wrestled the window open, inviting a breath of the city night. For a time, my first night unfolded in quietude. Belongings found their places, the shower rinsed away the day's travel, and by midnight, I sought sleep. Being a restless sleeper, I registered the house's nocturnal chorus, the timber's sighs, the distant gurgle in antiquated pipes. But near too, a different sound intruded, the measured tread of what sounded distinctly like heavy boots pacing the floorboards outside my door. Not hurried steps, but slow, deliberate, back and forth. Slipping from bed, feet finding shoes, I eased the door open just a sliver. The corridor swam in gloom, pierced only by that frail bulb near the stairwell. A shape materialized at the far end, tall, clad in a coat of an older cut, crowned with a hat. I blinked, clearing sleep fog from my eyes. Then the head turned, tilting towards me. The dimness obscured any features, yet an unnerving certainty settled upon me. It was watching. I swung the door wider, a question forming. "Do you need assistance?" But before it found voice, the figure retreated. One step back, melting into the dense shadows pooled near the wall, and vanished. There one instant, the next, only empty, dusty air. My body went rigid, a wire pulled taut. A prickling sensation crawled across my arms, the nape of my neck. Heart hammering against my ribs, I stood frozen in the doorway. 10 seconds, perhaps, stretched into an eternity of silence. Another scan of the corridor, vacant. I ventured out, crossing the worn floor runner to the spot where the figure had stood. Nothing. No open doors, no protesting floorboards, no residual trace. The frantic thrum of my pulse echoed in my ears. Forcing slow, deliberate breaths, I retreated, secured the lock, and lectured myself about exhaustion playing tricks. Sleep, when it finally came near dawn, was shallow and fraught, punctuated by every nocturnal creak. Late the next morning, awakening felt like surfacing from murky depths. An incongruity registered immediately. The small chair beside the window had shifted. I distinctly recalled setting it flush against the wall before sleep claimed me. Now, it sat a good foot away, angled slightly inward. Perhaps I'd bumped it, disoriented in the dark, or maybe memory failed me. Yet, a dissonance lingered. Downstairs, the day proceeded calmly. Agnes Blackwood polished countertops in the kitchen, offering only clipped responses to my attempts at conversation. No inquiry about my night's rest, no mention of footsteps or spectral gentlemen. I chose silence. The day was spent elsewhere, returning only as dusk bled into night. That second evening found me settled with a book, the room bathed in the weak, amber glow of the single lamp atop the dresser. Around midnight, a faint scraping sound surfaced, unsettlingly close. Outside the door, within the room itself, I held my breath, listening intently. A soft thump followed. My pulse quickened. Setting the book aside, I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. Silence reigned in the hallway. With a decisive twist, I flung the door open, peering out. Nothing but shadows and the faint hum of the old building. Turning back into the room, my gaze snagged on the dresser. It was askew, nudged several inches from its previous position. I knew its placement precisely. I'd aligned it with a distinct scuff mark on the floorboards. Now, it sat crooked. Frowning, I approached, placing my hands on the heavy solid wood. Moving it required bracing my shoulder against it, a significant effort for even an inch of displacement. The notion of it shifting unaided felt absurd. I scrutinized the floor. No drag marks. No rational explanation. Unease coiled in my gut. That night became a vigil. I remained awake, perched on the edge of the bed, the lamp casting long, dancing shadows. Around 2:30, a low murmuring arose, seemingly from the air near the foot of my bed. Indistinct whispers, like two hushed voices conferring, the words lost in the quiet static of the room. I scrambled upright, spinning around, bare walls, empty space. The murmuring ebbed, fading into nothingness. My throat was parchment dry. A tremor ran through my hands. I tried to pinpoint the source, but it was maddeningly diffuse, emanating from nowhere and everywhere near the bed's end. Minutes later, silence reclaimed the room. Sleep was a distant shore I couldn't reach. Closing my eyes conjured the sensation of being watched. By the third day, exhaustion was a physical weight. My eyes burned, my head felt packed with cotton. Downstairs, coffee was all I could manage. Agnes inquired, a rare show of concern if all was well. A brittle smile, a murmured, "Fine." Admitting the attic room was unraveling my composure felt like defeat. Seeking clarity, I stepped outside. The guest house loomed, its facade weathered, window frames cracked like old bones. The steep pitch of the roof culminated in a small, rusted weather vane. My gaze drifted up to the attic window, my window. A peculiar dislocation washed over me, a sense of observing myself from that very vantage point, or perhaps from another time entirely. That night held a plan, documentation. My phone sat ready, poised to capture any auditory anomaly. Lamp extinguished, device clutched tight. I lay in the darkness. Midnight arrived, heralded by the corridor floorboards, beginning their familiar lament. The footsteps returned, louder this time, more insistent. They approached my door, paused, a breath held in the silence, then continued towards the stairs. Heart pounding, I slipped out of bed, eased the door open, and stepped into the hall. The overhead bulb flickered erratically. There, near the stairwell's descent, stood the figure. Dark coat, wide-brimmed hat, undeniably solid. As I raised my phone, fumbling with the screen, the light stuttered again, plunging the corridor into momentary darkness. When it steadied, he was gone. I sprinted down the hallway, reaching the stairs in seconds. Empty. A quick descent to the floor below yielded nothing. No closing doors, no retreating footsteps, just the house settling around me. A profound chill seeped into my bones, the air suddenly smelling faintly of old leather. Climbing back to the attic, breath ragged, I reviewed the phone's recording. Shaky footage of a dimly lit and empty corridor. Cursing under my breath, I locked myself back inside. Sitting on the bed, striving for calm, the lamp on the dresser abruptly winked out. I froze. A beat of silence, then it flickered back to life. Sweat beaded on my palms. Leaping up, I checked the cord, securely plugged in. The switch clicked normally under my thumb, the light steady. Backing away, breathing shallowly, the urge to flee warred with a stubborn refusal to be routed. The thought of Agnes's knowing, silent gaze kept me rooted. I stayed, stomach knotted, unable to settle. In the pre-dawn hours, Fitful sleep finally claimed me, only to be shattered by a visceral shriek, metal grinding against stone, loud and abrasive. Disoriented, heart slamming against my ribs, I sat bolt upright. The sound echoed again, seeming to originate from below, perhaps the cellar. Phone in one hand, a small torch fished from my bag in the other, I ventured out. The house lay steeped in 4 a.m. silence. The basement door, previously always shut, now stood slightly ajar. The switch beside it buzzed, the light within flickering fitfully. My torch beam cut through the gloom, illuminating stairs descending into darkness. The air rising from below was damp, heavy with the odor of cold concrete and mildew. Reluctance warred with a desperate need for answers. Step by cautious step, I descended, muscles rigid, knuckles white around the torch. The basement lights pulsed unsteadily. The space was a repository of forgotten things, shrouded furniture, boxes piled high. I expected disruption, signs of intrusion, nothing. Then a faint rattling from behind a stack of leaning shelves. Moving closer, my light found a small metal chain, swinging gently, clicking against the shelving unit. No draft, no open window could account for its movement. Adrenaline surged, flushing my face with heat. My breath came in shallow gasps. Standing immobile, torch beam sweeping the clutter, my own heartbeat filled the silence. Suddenly, the overhead bulb flared brightly, then died, plunging the basement into near-total darkness, save for my torch beam. A spike of pure fear pierced my chest. I swung the light back towards the shelves. Still nothing. Turning, I started back towards the stairs. That's when I saw them. On the dusty wooden banister leading upwards, handprints, dozens of them, large and small, adult-sized, overlapping, pressed deep into the thick layer of grime, as if a crowd had passed through, steadying themselves. But the dust was otherwise undisturbed, and I'd heard nothing beyond my own movements. I backed away slowly, the torchlight tracing the ghostly impressions. How? My mind scrambled for logic, finding none. Reaching out tentatively, my fingertips brushed the banister. Dust clung to my skin, yet the prints remained distinct, untouched, save for my single point of contact. Swallowing hard, I wiped my hand on my jeans, a tremor starting deep within. Calling Agnes seemed pointless. I retreated up the remaining steps, slipped through the basement door, and twisted the lock firmly behind me. Standing in the relative brightness of the ground floor hallway, the light steady now, I fought to regain control of my breathing. The ascent back to the attic was an exercise in vigilance, checking every shadow, every corner. Hands shaking, sweat cooling on my forehead and neck, I secured my bedroom door and leaned against it, ears ringing. Pacing the confines of the small room, the question circled relentlessly: stay or go? Escape beckoned, yet a strange inertia held me fast. More than mere curiosity, it felt like being caught in a temporal rift, oscillating between the present reality of peeling wallpaper and flickering lights, and intrusions from another era. The man in the antiquated coat, the inexplicably rearranged furniture. Sleep offered no refuge that morning. As sunlight painted the street below, I sat by the window, watching the oblivious rhythm of the city awaken. Coffee cups, briefcases, lives untouched by the unsettling currents within these walls. Later, descending the stairs, resolved to confront Agnes, I found her at the front desk, sorting papers. Before I could articulate the fear tightening my chest, she spoke, her voice calm, matter-of-fact, as if commenting on the weather. "I gather you've been disturbed." No explanation followed, just the weight of her weary gaze meeting mine. I waited. Silence stretched. When I pressed, asking about the figure, the handprints, she merely shook her head slowly. "It's a venerable house," she offered finally. "It sometimes resists newcomers." That was all. Back in the attic room, door closed, the ambiguity hung heavy in the air. Nerves frayed, the boundary between reality and illusion blurred. Perched on the edge of the bed, I mentally replayed the sequence. The phantom footsteps, the vanishing man, the migrating furniture, the disembodied whispers, the basement door swinging open, the multitude of dusty hands. A sense of entrapment, caught between logic and burgeoning terror. Each recollection sent a fresh jolt through my system. Distraction proved futile. My phone screen swam. The floorboards seemed to watch my restless pacing. And so I remain, here in this attic room, suspended in waiting. The corridor outside is presently quiet. Agnes is somewhere below, a silent custodian of secrets. My hands still tremble intermittently. Every glance towards the closet door is edged with apprehension. The bulb overhead continues its unpredictable flickering, each stutter a small shock to my system. Alone, the feeling persists that I am not. This place feels porous, time bleeding through the floorboards, and I am somehow caught in the confluence. How much longer I can endure this limbo, I cannot say. But for now, I listen. I wait. And I hope the next strange ripple in the fabric of this house doesn't pull me under completely. Ghosts were never part of my lexicon. Now the space over my shoulder feels permanently occupied. That crude stone visage, its first impression, remains indelible. Hewn from coarse rock, it offered a rough approximation of a human head, yet devoid of eyes, lacking even a nose. Only a mouth split the surface, a compressed but unwavering smile that seeded immediate disquiet within me. A gift, I reminded myself, attempting a dismissive chuckle that caught in my throat. But from the moment it occupied my living room shelf, an insidious conviction took root. It watched. Sightless, it nonetheless seemed to gaze. An illogical notion I tried to shed, but the feeling clung persistent as shadow. My solitary existence unfolds within a compact one-bedroom shell. A lone window gapes onto the indifferent street. Twin, threadbare armchairs slump opposite a scarred coffee table. A simple shelf clings to the wall, a repository for accumulated trifles and dust. Upon receiving the stone head, I hadn't lingered on its strangeness, merely slotting it onto the highest shelf, rightward, beside a paperback perpetually awaiting its conclusion. Immediately, its posture snagged my attention, a fractional forward lean, as if poised perpetually on the precipice, straining to peer down. An imbalance in the carving, I reasoned, or perhaps the shelf itself held a subtle cant. A quick nudge confirmed its stability, and I turned back to the rhythm of my solitude. Later, dusk, bleeding through the window, I sat nursing my phone, my gaze intermittently snagged by the effigy. Each time I could have sworn its orientation had minutely altered, now tilted forward more acutely, now swiveled a hair's breadth westward, my own mind surely playing tricks. Rising, I approached the shelf, meticulously repositioning the stone face. Back on the couch, minutes dissolved. Then, the fine hairs on my forearms lifted. I looked. It had pivoted slightly to the right, aiming its eyeless stare toward my seat. A frantic flutter commenced in my chest, though I forced it down. "The building settles," I muttered, "uneven floors." Again, I adjusted it, this time attempting to secure it by wedging a sliver of cardboard beneath its base. Seeking refuge and distraction, I flicked on the television. Hours passed. Sleep eventually called. Nothing further disturbed the night, yet an unease lingered, the sensation of sharing the space with something vigilant. Morning light revealed the statue facing squarely into the room, rotated outward from the wall as if it had performed a slow pirouette in the darkness. I stood, scrubbing at my eyes, no memory of leaving it thus. Sleepwalking wasn't among my known habits. Lifting it, I felt its dense, cool weight, turning it over in my hand. I traced the smooth curve of its mouth, that small, fixed grin radiating discomfort. Still, just an oddity, a peculiar bit of craft. I returned it to the shelf, resolving to ignore it. I prepared for the day, escaped the apartment, actively pushing the stone face from my thoughts. Throughout work, its image flickered at the edges of my concentration, yet I wrestled my focus back to spreadsheets and emails, convincing myself I'd magnified trivialities. Just inert rock, carved with a mouth. Nevertheless, a potent urge surfaced, to discard it, donate it, bury it in a box. Countering this was a vague sense of obligation to its giver. Perhaps concealment was the answer. The thought took hold. That evening found me before the television once more, the statue perched silently on its shelf. I sought solace in the flickering screen. During a lull in the film, my eyes drifted to it. The overhead light sculpted shadows around the mouth, deepening the grin's unsettling curve. And then, did it shift? A tremor, infinitesimal, like a held breath released. My heart leaped, my stomach clenched. I cranked the volume, wrenching my gaze away. Dampness bloomed on my palms. I wiped them repeatedly on my trousers. The movie became background noise, incomprehensible. Finally, I killed the screen and rose, heading for the bedroom. Passing the shelf, my eyes were drawn inexorably to the stone face. It seemed again to be leaning toward me, toward my path. My mouth turned arid. I hastened my steps. Once in bed, the image replayed, a trick of light perspective surely. I squeezed my eyes shut, commanding sleep. Sleep was elusive, drifting, then snapping awake, certain of some sound. A faint scrape, dry and low, so quiet it could have been blood rushing in my ears. My pulse hammered with each phantom noise. Eventually, abandoning rest, I crept back to the living room. Flipping the switch, I surveyed the scene. The statue remained on the shelf, but closer, undeniably closer, to the edge. My skin tightened. Swallowing hard, I picked it up, deliberately turning it to face the wall. A test. If it faced outward come morning, imagination could no longer be blamed. I retreated to bed. Dawn broke. I walked directly into the living room. The statue was oriented forward, its grin aimed into the space, not at the wall as I had left it. The room seemed to tilt. Heat prickled the back of my neck. Was sanity fraying? I moved it to the coffee table, determined to keep it under direct observation while I made coffee. My glances darted towards it constantly. It remained static, yet its presence radiated a palpable tension. Over the ensuing days, other transformations emerged. The blank, smooth planes flanking the mouth began to exhibit faint lines. Shallow initially, they deepened incrementally, forming nascent grooves precisely where eyes should reside. Running a fingertip across the stone, I felt their rough texture, not imagined. The carving was changing. Perhaps the stone was flawed, cracking under some internal stress. But the lines seemed too purposeful, curving with the distinct suggestion of orbital sockets. Denial became impossible. Nightly, the soft, scraping noise grew more insistent, its source elusive. I'd sometimes burst into the living room, flicking on the light, hoping to catch it mid-motion. It always appeared still, yet never quite in the same position I recalled. Once, tilted as if contemplating the ceiling. Another time, leaning so far forward it defied gravity. My hands trembled each time I felt compelled to write it, baffled by how solid stone could achieve such subtle, persistent mobility. One evening, the pressure in my chest became a physical weight. Restlessness propelled me, pacing the confines of my living room. I threw open the window, gulping cool night air, seeking relief that wouldn't come. The statue sat on its shelf, its half-formed eye sockets tracking my movements. The grin seemed wider now, sharper. I stared at it from across the room. Suddenly, a whisper, sharp and sibilant, bloomed not in my ears, but inside my skull. A pressure, a thought that wasn't mine. Who observes whom, Silas, and how much truth can you bear to witness? I stumbled back, breath catching, hands flying to my temples. The whisper vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only a ringing silence. When I dared look again, the statue's grin seemed stretched, impossibly wider, triumphant. I crossed the room, snatched it from the shelf. The impulse surged. Throw it, hurl it through the open window, shatter it on the pavement below. But my arms felt leaden, paralyzed by an unnamed dread. The act felt forbidden. Defeated, I placed it back on the shelf and fled to the kitchen, splashing cold water on my face. Hours crawled by. I tried music, tidying, anything to occupy my mind, leaving the statue undisturbed. Yet every few minutes, my gaze was pulled back to it, trapped. The apartment walls felt closer, the air thicker. That night, the whisper returned, fainter this time, a sibilant hiss as I brushed my teeth, making my ears thrum. Are you certain you are the one in control? My heart slammed against my ribs. I nearly dropped the toothbrush. Rinsing quickly, I retreated from the bathroom adrift. Exhaustion warred with raw nerves as I finally sought bed. Lights out, lying rigid, every creak amplified. Sleep eventually claimed me, fractured and shallow. Sometime past midnight, a low, dragging scrape echoed from the hallway. My eyes snapped open, pulse frantic. Sitting bolt upright, I strained to listen. The scraping persisted, punctuated by a soft thump. Slipping out of bed, I moved with excruciating slowness toward the bedroom door, easing it open. The living room lay in darkness, save for the weak sodium glow filtering from the street, casting long, distorted shadows. I could discern the silhouette of the shelf, the slumped forms of the chairs. The statue was absent from its usual perch. A few hesitant steps inward floorboards groaning beneath my weight. My limbs felt heavy, my breathing shallow and ragged. Then I saw it, resting on the coffee table, facing me, angled so its nascent eye sockets seemed fixed on my chest. The corners of its mouth were undeniably upturned, mocking my fear. My hand fumbled for the light switch. Illumination flooded the room, revealing stark changes. The grooves defining the eyes were deeper, sharper. They looked raw, on the verge of splitting open. Nausea churned in my gut, sweat beaded on my brow, and on the dark wood of the coffee table, faint scratches, thin lines tracing a path, as if the stone itself had slid across the surface. My legs gave way. I sank onto the couch, trying to reconcile the impossible evidence before me. The statue had moved. It had left physical traces. Its very form was altering. I reached out, picked it up again. This time, I pressed my fingers into the deepening eye grooves. They felt jagged, like fresh wounds in the stone. A peculiar warmth radiated from them, faint but distinct, pulsing against my fingertips. It felt animate. Mutterings escaped my lips. Not possible, also just tired. Pathetic attempts at self-reassurance. I set the statue down on the couch cushion beside me, watching it intently, waiting. Nothing. After a long moment, I stood, resolved to sequester it. Clutching that unsettling weight, I navigated the dim hallway to the cramped closet, secreting the effigy on the top shelf amidst forgotten footwear and dust. I pulled the door firmly shut. My hands still shook, but closing that door brought a sliver of relief. Returning to the living room, I stood listening. Silence. No whispers, no scraping. The quiet offered a fragile calm. I decided to remain there, vigilant, just in case. The night bled slowly towards dawn. I watched the clock, ears straining. Silence held. Around 4, exhaustion forced me onto the couch. I wouldn't leave the living room unattended. I woke near 7, neck stiff, the statue instantly flooding my thoughts. Scrambling up, I hurried to the closet. The door remained closed. Heart pounding, I reached for the knob, pulled it open. The statue sat exactly where I'd placed it. Relief washed over me, potent but incomplete. A lingering wrongness permeated the air. For several days, it remained entombed in the closet. Yet each night brought the faint, dry scraping sounds from the hallway. Earplugs dulled the noise, but not the subtle vibrations, the sense of movement nearby. My nerves frayed further. Every unexpected sound made me flinch. Checking on the statue became a ritual of dread. The lines defining its face seemed to deepen with each inspection, the edges crumbling slightly, as if being hollowed from within. The grin stretched wider still. Returning home from work became an ordeal. My apartment felt suffocating, the air stagnant with unseen pressure. I started lingering late at the office, detouring to cafes, anything to delay my return. But avoidance was temporary. Each time I crossed the threshold, I felt its presence, an invisible weight even hidden away. The memory of the whisper echoed, a persistent pressure against the inside of my skull, demanding attention. One evening, I saw them, faint, parallel gouges marring the paint near the floorboards in the hallway, a delicate trail leading from the closet's threshold toward the living room. My breath hitched. I tried scrubbing them away, but they were etched into the surface, shallow but undeniable. My hands trembled, visualizing the stone effigy dragging itself along the floor, scraping against a wall. I retreated to the couch, sinking into the cushions, trying to think. The familiar pressure built behind my eyes, the precursor to the whisper. My mouth was dust, my hands clenched into useless fists. The urge to throw the thing out warred with a deeper fear of escalation, fear of it returning, fear of what might happen if I provoked it further. So I sat, legs trembling, thoughts racing in frantic circles. What could I do? The presence of that thing, locked away but potent, felt stronger now than any fear of the unknown. For now it waited in the closet, its half-formed eyes staring into the darkness. And I waited in my living room, staring at the closed door, each pulse a heavy drumbeat against the cage of my ribs. Three nights it took, after the boxes were unpacked and the ghost of the previous tenant's cheap air freshener began to fade from the apartment on Alder Street. 3 nights before I saw it, a silhouette etched against the glass directly opposite mine, motionless, observing. It nearly escaped my notice. I'd been adrift in the blue glow of my phone, sprawled on the mattress, when some primal instinct tugged my gaze upward. The shape held its ground, a sentinel in the urban canyon. A hard blink, a recalibration of tired eyes, and the window across was empty once more. The following evening, it reappeared. Cities have been my ecosystem since birth. The concrete sprawl of Los Angeles, the verticality of Chicago, and now this rain-slicked jewel, Seattle. You learn the rhythm, the unspoken civic liturgy. Avert your eyes on the light rail. Feign deafness to the domestic dramas bleeding through thin plasterboard. Above all, resist the urge to peer into the illuminated rectangles of strangers' lives. Yet this presence flouted the code, night after night, anchored to the identical spot, a study in absolute stillness. Initially, I compartmentalized it. Seattle thrives on eccentricities. This was merely another exhibit. But a week dissolved into the relentless routine, and a morbid curiosity compelled me to document. The apparition materialized near 11, sometimes nudging earlier, occasionally later. It would stand, an unwavering column of shadow, for intervals ranging from a brisk 20 minutes to an excruciating hour or more. Then abruptly, it would cease to be. Not retreat, not step back into darkness, simply dematerialize. My apartment occupies the 8th floor. The structure across the way, the Pendleton Tower, is my building's architectural twin. Weathered crimson brick, fire escapes descending in skeletal zigzags, windows like vacant eyes in regimented rows. The figure favored a window directly aligned with mine, perhaps a floor higher, the 9th, I surmised. 2 weeks deep, my phone became my reluctant weapon. The photographs yielded only smudges, ambiguous blurs against the faint interior light, a vaguely anthropomorphic patch of deeper night. Video fared no better. The sensor struggled, overwhelmed by the gloom and the distance. It was the utter lack of motion that gnawed at my sanity. Humans fidget. They shift their weight, betray impatience, glance at devices, scratch an unseen itch. This thing was stone, a statue carved from night itself. Binoculars followed, not for voyeurism, I rationalized, but for reconnaissance, a desperate need to comprehend the threat. The first attempt, my hands trembled so violently the cityscape swam in fractured circles. When the focus finally sharpened, a gasp tore from my throat. The figure wasn't merely dark clad, it was an absolute negation of light. A hole punched through the fabric of the visible world, assuming a human outline. No discernible features, no clothing texture, just pure, unreflective void shaped like a person. I began drawing the blinds, heavy vinyl shields against the night, but the sensation lingered, a prickling awareness of being watched. Lying rigid in bed, ceiling patterns swimming before my eyes, I knew it stood sentinel beyond the barrier. Sometimes a faint, rhythmic tap-tap-tapping seemed to emanate from the glass, but investigation always revealed only empty air and the city's ambient hum. A month of this siege eroded my composure. I sought out Silas, the building superintendent, a fixture in the lobby's cramped office, perpetually immersed in dog-eared paperbacks detailing dusty frontier justice. Silas, I began, striving for nonchalance. Strange question, maybe. Do you know who's living in the Pendleton, directly across from my unit? He lowered his book, his gaze shrewd beneath bushy brows. 9th floor, east facing, nobody. Whole level's been vacant for months. Owners planning a big overhaul, last I heard. My throat constricted. How long vacant? He stroked his grizzled beard. Pendleton got new owners back in January, turfed everyone out, claimed they were gutting the place, ran smack into permitting hell though. Been sitting empty since February, give or take. You're certain no one's been inside? Well, had work crews crawling over it first couple months? Sure, but they packed up when the permits stalled. Place has been sealed tight since April. He squinted. Curiosity piqued. Why the interest? Just wondering, I managed. Thanks, Silas. Upstairs, sweat slicked my palms. I paced the confines of my apartment until dusk bled into true night, then forced myself to the window. It was there, but altered. Closer now, pressed right against the pane. I could distinguish hands, splayed dark fingers against the glass. As I stood paralyzed, it executed a slow, deliberate head tilt, neck bending at an angle utterly wrong, like a marionette whose strings had snapped. I wrenched the blinds shut, the plastic slats clattering. A hotel room materialized online, paid for with trembling fingers. Clothes, laptop, essentials snatched in a blur. I fled, practically vaulting down the stairs, the elevator an unthinkable cage. Out on the street, gulping damp air, I risked a glance upward. My window was dark. But across the chasmic street in the Pendleton Tower, a flicker of movement. The figure restored to its usual post. And then it lifted an arm, a hand waving, not a greeting. The gesture was stilted, jerky, like an anatomist clumsily animating a corpse. The following morning brought shame and self-recrimination. Stress, obviously. New city, demanding job, solitude, a perfect storm for overwrought nerves. I returned, resolved to reclaim rationality. It stood waiting, broad daylight, indifferent to the sun. Still at the window, hands flattened against the glass, head canted at that sickening, impossible degree. The police were polite, professional. Someone reported in a supposedly vacant building. They'd dispatch a unit. From my window, I watched 2 officers disappear into the Pendletons' entrance. 20 minutes crawled by before my phone rang. "We conducted a thorough sweep of the 9th floor, sir," the officer reported, his voice tinged with weary patience. "Apartments are completely empty. No forced entry, no squatters, zip. Windows secured from the inside. Are you positive about what you saw?" I mumbled thanks and disconnected. The figure had vanished with their arrival, but its absence felt temporary, tactical. The rest of the day dissolved into fruitless online searches, Pendleton Tower history, accidents, deaths, and scandals. Nothing surfaced beyond the mundane biography of a 1920s Seattle apartment block. Night fell. I waited, a knot tightening in my gut. 11 o'clock chimed digitally. Nothing. 11:30. Stillness. Perhaps it was just fractured nerves. Perhaps the official presence had spooked whoever it was. At midnight, a fragile tendril of relief began to unfurl. Then came the tapping, not from across the street, from my window pane. Slowly, mechanically, I turned. It stood on my side of the glass, its face inches away. This close, the darkness wasn't merely absence, it was an abyss that's sucking at the light, warping the very air around its edges like a heat haze. Reality itself seemed thin, fragile near its presence. I bolted. No phone, no keys, just the frantic slap of socked feet on the floorboards. Down 8 flights of stairs, the elevator shaft humming like a throat, preparing to swallow me. I burst onto the pavement, lungs burning. My window, when I dared look up, was empty. But across the street, back in its familiar haunt within the Pendleton, I saw it. It raised its hand again, that disjointed, experimental wave. A week unfolded on a friend's couch out in Ballard under the guise of catastrophic plumbing failures. Daily calls to the Pendleton's management company yielded only bureaucratic static until finally a harried property manager let slip that the renovation delays weren't solely about permits. 3 separate construction crews had walked off the job, citing reasons they refused to articulate. Return was inevitable. Hospitality has limits, hotel bills mount. But I fortified my territory first. Blackout curtains, thick as velvet shrouds, additional deadbolts, and sash locks on windows and the door. A network of small security cameras, their unblinking eyes covering every approach. The first night back, the curtains remained drawn, sealed against the night. The camera feeds showed only the familiar geography of my apartment. Then, precisely at 11 p.m., the world plunged into absolute black. Not just the lamps. My phone screen died, my laptop winked out, every electronic pulse silenced. In the profound, suffocating darkness, I heard the distinct sound of my new blackout curtain sliding open. The rod groaned under the weight, a slow, deliberate reveal, inch by agonizing inch. I was pinned by terror, breath trapped in my chest. When the gap was complete, it stood silhouetted against the ambient city glow filtering from beyond, inside my apartment, between me and the only escape. And this time, it spoke. The voice was a hideous chorus, layered tones overlapping, some too high, shrill, others impossibly deep, grating, none remotely human. "Why did you run?" it inquired. "Aren't we supposed to be companions?" My hand closed around the nearest object, a ceramic coffee mug. I hurled it with all my strength. It passed directly through the figure's torso, impacting the wall behind with a sharp crack. The figure flickered, momentarily unstable, like a corrupted digital file. "That was discourteous," it stated. Its head began to rotate, a slow, smooth swivel, turning a full 360 degrees, while its body remained perfectly, unnervingly still. I waited so patiently for an invitation. You never extended one, so I invited myself. My own voice felt dredged from a deep well. "What are you?" "I am solitary," it replied, its mouth immobile. "This structure is hollow now, only me, floor upon floor of emptiness. But then you arrived across the way, and you perceived me. No others can, only you." It glided a step closer. Where its intangible feet should have been, the hardwood floor seemed to shimmer, buckle, momentarily losing its solid state. "Stay away," I choked out, my back finding the unyielding wall. "But we shall be inseparable," it promised, the composite voice sickeningly gentle, the closest of companions, indefinitely. It reached for me, those elongated, void-dark fingers extending. An impossible cold radiated from it, a chill that paradoxically burned. The darkness intensified, rushed inward, and consumed everything. Consciousness returned in the sterile fluorescence of a hospital room 2 days later. A doctor explained that my neighbor, alerted by screams, had called emergency services. They'd found me unconscious in my apartment floor, suffering from severe hypothermia despite the mild spring evening. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing, all doors and windows bolted from within. Against medical advice, I discharged myself the moment I could stand, straight back to the apartment on Alder Street, packed frantically, stuffing essentials into my car, drove south without a backward glance, not stopping until the skyline of Portland rose ahead. My new place is ground level, no towering structures nearby, no windows mirroring other windows across narrow streets. The blinds stay perpetually drawn, yet sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, I hear it, a faint, familiar tapping against the glass. And when I steel myself, force my gaze toward the reflective surface, I see it, a familiar dark silhouette materializing in the reflection, standing just behind my shoulder, its head cocked at that sickeningly impossible angle. It found me. It will always find me, because it spoke one undeniable truth. I am the only one who can see it, and it is so terribly, terribly lonely.